No one in the Skylux lounge at San Francisco Airport that day had any idea they were about to witness a moment capable of shaking an entire airline, all because of a single contemptuous glance directed at the wrong man. But Marcus Hale knew. He felt it the moment the glass doors slid open and a room full of polished, privileged eyes swept across him, the way someone might glance at an object placed in the wrong corner. A black man in a minimalist hoodie, faded jeans and worn sneakers. An appearance so ordinary no one bothered to notice, or more accurately, no one wanted to. Yet the truth was that they were standing in front of a man who could, with a single signature, erase hundreds of millions of dollars from their financial projections. Marcus stood still beneath the warm golden lights of the lounge lights, carefully designed to make VIP guests feel like they truly belonged there. But he did not belong, at least not in their eyes. He felt the chill radiating from tailored Italian suits and from the calculating gazes of people who only recognized power when it wore silk or carried a platinum watch. No one ever thinks power can hide beneath cheap cotton. No one thinks power might sit quietly in a corner drinking water instead of premium champagne. Marcus Hale, 42 years old, CEO of Hale Tech Logistics, the man who had transformed the nation's shipping infrastructure, sat among them like a storm disguised as a breeze. He flipped a page on his tablet where charts, numbers, and contracts glowed with a value of $50 million annually, an exclusive deal North Star Airways had spent 6 months desperately courting. But Marcus did not trust polished presentations, nor the luxurious lunch their CEO had treated him to the week before. He believed in only one thing: real experience, unfiltered, unpolished, unmasked. A good CEO must see what lies beneath the surface. That was why he was here, a billionaire, disguised as an ordinary traveler, quietly observing every smallest detail, from the tone of the attendants to how the airline treated people who did not look powerful. And then, when he lifted his head, a small moment sliced cleanly into his mind. Across from him, 2 men in suits' faces, smooth and voices carrying the familiar confidence of those who believe the world spins around them, were chatting lazily. One glanced at Marcus, smirked, and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. They let anyone into Skylux now. This place is really going downhill. Marcus heard every word, but he did not react. No raised brows, no change in expression. Only a faint sensation, sharp as a blade, brushed against his chest. A familiar feeling he had learned to bury since growing up poor in Atlanta, the feeling of being judged before being seen. But what unsettled him was not the insult itself. It was the question that flickered in his mind. If they treated someone as calm as him like this, what would they do to customers who had no voice at all? A message tone broke through his thoughts. Sarah Jenkins, his chief operating officer, a woman respected across the entire logistics industry for her cold precision and strategic brilliance, had texted Apex, is already speculating that you are choosing North Star. If they knew you were flying today, they would not sleep tonight. Marcus chuckled softly. Evaluating their real performance, he replied, "Decision will be made after landing." He did not know that his decision would not be based on customer service as planned, but on a moment of prejudice and injustice, a mistake so small that if it had happened to anyone else, no one would have cared. A server passed by, hesitated at the champagne cart, glanced at Marcus, then ultimately chose not to offer him any. A tiny detail, yet it was a silent spark. Marcus stood, slung his frayed backpack over one shoulder, and walked toward the boarding gate. The man from earlier glanced at him again, this time stepping aside, as if Marcus were intruding on their space. No apology. No kindness. In that moment, Marcus realized that this real-world test was revealing a far bigger problem than he expected. A problem not limited to one airline, not limited to aviation. It was a reflection of society itself. And then, like a cold omen, as the boarding doors opened and he stepped into the aircraft that would determine North Star Airways' future, Marcus Hale felt something waiting for him, a storm gathering above a deceptively peaceful sky. A storm they had created, and they were about to face its full force. They just did not know it yet. As for Marcus, he was ready. Even though he had no idea that this flight would change the entire airline industry forever. Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin of North Star Flight 417 with the same calm he carried everywhere, but beneath that quiet composure, he was studying every smallest detail. The expressions of the flight attendants, the way passengers were greeted, the tone and posture of every crew member. He had always believed that the true nature of a company was not shown on stage, but backstage, in how they treated the people they assumed did not matter. What he did not know was that in just a few minutes, he himself would become that unimportant person, and the final test he had prepared for North Star would turn into a death sentence for an entire system. Marcus settled into seat 1A, the seat he had booked 3 weeks earlier, the seat often considered the throne of first class, with the best view and the largest legroom. He placed his backpack down, fastened his seatbelt, and exhaled softly, as if reminding himself to observe without judging too soon. But that calm lasted only a few seconds before a sharp voice, dripping with entitlement, sliced through the air. "You are in the wrong seat." Marcus turned and saw a woman in her early 50s, blonde hair, stiff and lacquered, like a wax figure, eyes filled with open disdain. Linda Crawford, the face of someone far too used to being served, far too used to being the highest priority, far too used to a world that always bowed to her. "I don't think so," Marcus replied gently, his calm still intact. "My boarding pass says 1A. He raised his ticket, but Linda did not bother to look. Her diamond-covered hand pointed at the seat, as if commanding an employee, not addressing a fellow passenger with equal rights. "This seat is always mine," she declared like an unbreakable rule. "I am titanium elite. This airline knows me. You just need to get up and move." A cold shiver ran down Marcus's spine, not from fear, but from recognition. He was far too familiar with this kind of treatment, the habit of sizing people up by their clothes, their skin, their appearance, the kind of judgment he thought he had left behind long ago when he became a billionaire at the age of 40. But in a place like first class, prejudice still thrived. Flight attendant Brenda Collins appeared with a smile that tried to seem professional, yet her eyes avoided Marcus, as if looking at him too long would lower her service score. "Sir," she said in a soft voice that carried the weight of favoritism, "we can move you to seat 2A, the one just behind you, to resolve the situation quickly." Marcus looked at Brenda for a few seconds, long enough to see the truth clearly. She did not care whose ticket was correct. She cared only about who carried more weight in the company's eyes. "I want to sit in the seat I purchased, Marcus," said his voice, quiet but heavy as stone. 1A is mine." Linda let out a sharp, grating laugh. "Do you know who my husband is?" Marcus looked directly into her eyes. "No, and I do not need to." That answer lit the fuse. Brenda clenched the strap of her apron, her face turning red. She turned and called for the captain. Within minutes, Captain Robert Thorne appeared, tall, silver-haired, with the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to absolute compliance. He greeted Linda first with a courteous nod before turning to Marcus with wary eyes, as if looking at a problem instead of a passenger. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Linda pointed at Marcus, as if accusing a criminal. "He is in my seat. I told him to move, but he refused." Marcus held up his ticket again. "I booked this seat." The captain glanced briefly at the ticket, then looked at Marcus, longer than he looked at the boarding pass. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he had heard about and read about, but had not personally confronted in a long time: prejudice. "We need you to move to the seat behind you to avoid delays," the captain said in a tone of finality, not suggestion. "If you do not cooperate, I will have to request security assistance." A silent detonation went off inside Marcus, not because of the threat, but because the truth was now undeniable. They did not care whose seat was correct. They did not care about reason. They cared only about who looked like a VIP and who looked like someone who did not belong. Marcus unfastened his seatbelt and stood slowly without bowing his head. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and calm like the surface of a lake before a storm. "I will move." Linda smiled with triumph, Brenda exhaled in relief, and the captain turned away as if he had won. None of them realized that the moment Marcus stepped into seat 2A was the moment they pushed North Star off the sky. When Marcus sat down in the new seat, his heart did not race, and anger did not surge. Instead, there was a cold silence, sharp as a blade. He opened his tablet, logged into Hailtech's secure channel, and typed the words that would bury an airline. North Star failed the test. Cancel all negotiations. Begin transition to Horizon Air immediately. And as the plane began to taxi, the people who had just forced him out of seat 1A believed they had successfully handled a troublesome passenger. They had no idea they had just lost $50 million every year. They had no idea they had just destroyed their own careers. They had no idea the storm had already begun. But Marcus knew, and he was ready to let it sweep everything away. As North Star Flight 417 began accelerating down the runway, and the mist swept into long white streaks across the window, Marcus Hale leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed, though his mind was sharply awake. There was no hesitation left in him. What had just happened was not a small mistake, not an isolated incident, and certainly not a simple misunderstanding between a customer and an employee. It was culture, the true culture of an entire company, and for a CEO who had built his entire empire on respect for employees, partners, and customers alike, Marcus couldn't accept partnering with an airline where discrimination operated as if it were standard procedure. As the plane lifted off the ground, he felt that familiar sensation he had experienced only in the defining moments of his life, the moment he signed his first international contract, the moment he saw the first Hailtech manufacturing plant completed, and even the moment he stood back up after his very first failure as a young entrepreneur. It was the feeling of a major decision, a turning point from which there was no return. He opened his tablet, accessed the secure network, and initiated an emergency meeting. The faces of Sarah Jenkins, his steel-edged chief operating officer, and Daniel Reed, his head of legal, who spoke as if every word could become a clause in a contract, appeared on the screen. Sarah's brows knitted the moment she saw Marcus's expression. North Star is a problem, Marcus did not answer immediately. He wanted to choose his words carefully, even though frustration churned beneath his calm like an undertow. Not a problem, he said slowly. a disaster. Then he recounted everything, every glance, every remark, every attitude, without leaving out a single detail. As he spoke, Sarah's lips pressed tighter and tighter, and Daniel was scribbling so fast he barely had time to breathe. When Marcus described Captain Thorne threatening to call security, Sarah let out a sound halfway between a laugh and outrage. They treated you like that, a first-class passenger, their own potential partner. Marcus shook his head. They didn't know who I was. And that's exactly the point. They believe they have the right to humiliate anyone who doesn't look like what they consider a VIP. If I had been an ordinary traveler, they would have kicked me off the plane today without a single apology. Daniel pushed his glasses up his nose, his voice like a gavel striking. That puts North Star at serious legal risk. Discriminatory treatment of passengers can escalate into media, fallout lawsuits, stock crises. Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. The issue is not the media, it's character. Marcus looked out the window. The clouds drifted past more quickly as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. His reflection appeared on the small pane, a calm man with a storm inside him. North Star is not worthy, he said, his voice low, but as cold as steel. We are cancelling all negotiations, effective immediately. Sarah exhaled hard, as if she had been waiting for that sentence from the beginning. Apex will be thrilled, she said. They have always wanted that contract back. Apex has a chance, Marcus replied. Call their CEO. If she can open a meeting within 1 hour after I land, the contract is hers. Daniel nodded. I will prepare the termination letter. What reason do you want to cite? Marcus fell silent for a few seconds, as the scenes replayed vividly in his mind, Linda's contemptuous stare, Brenda's superior tone, Captain Thorne's threat, and the silence of the passengers who watched him as if he were simply someone sitting where he did not belong. Write the truth, he said. An airline that allows discrimination to grow as part of its culture. An airline that does not protect its customers. An airline unworthy of having the Hailtech name appear in any report. Sarah nodded slowly. Then it's over. Marcus closed his eyes. No, this is only the beginning. When the call ended, Marcus set the tablet aside. Brenda walked past without looking at him, but he saw in every step of hers the self-satisfaction of someone who believed she had handled the problem. Linda, seated in front, was being served champagne, laughing loudly, bragging on the phone that she had kept her favorite seat. In the first-class cabin, no one knew that Marcus's silence was determining their future. He was not burning with anger, not trembling with indignation. What remained inside him was a heavy, cold feeling, like metal sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And that feeling was far more dangerous than rage. A younger flight attendant, Trevor, approached quietly and placed a fresh glass of water on Marcus's tray. I saw what happened earlier, he whispered. I am sorry for them. Marcus looked at him. The young man's eyes held timid sincerity. It is not your fault, Marcus said, but it shows exactly where the problem is. Trevor seemed ready to say more, but Brenda appeared behind him with a sharp stare, forcing him to turn away instantly. And at that precise moment, Marcus understood clearly. One mistake by one employee is forgivable, but a mistake shared by an entire system can only be destroyed. As the plane cut through a thick layer of clouds, sunlight flooded the window and lit the sharp angles of Marcus's face. He exhaled softly, too quietly for anyone else to hear. But it was not the sigh of someone enduring injustice. It was the sigh of someone who had just made a decision that would shift the landscape. A decision North Star never imagined would come from the simple act of underestimating a man in a hoodie. Marcus opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. He no longer saw the airplane cabin. He saw the future, a future with no North Star beside Hail Tech. And he knew when the wheels touched down in Seattle, the storm would officially begin. As the wheels of North Star Flight 417 scraped the Seattle runway, with a harsh, dry friction, Marcus Hale remained seated in 2A, not rushing to stand like the other passengers. It was not fatigue, nor an attempt to prolong disappointment. He simply wanted to see clearly the faces of the people who had pushed North Star to the edge of a cliff without realizing it. Seatbelts clicked open one after another. Passengers shuffled, collected their belongings, muttered complaints under their breath. Linda Crawford stood directly ahead, straightening her silk scarf, lifting her chin as if she had just claimed a glorious victory. When she walked past Marcus, she cast a poisonous, triumphant smile down at him, the kind born from a lifetime of privilege. Marcus returned the look with eyes as calm and flat as a still lake, a stare sharp enough to unsettle her for a single fleeting second, though she quickly convinced herself she had just put a lesser passenger in his place. Brenda Collins stood near the aircraft door, offering each departing traveler the polite, mechanical smile she reserved for moments of supervision. But when Marcus approached, she did not smile. She only nodded briskly, dismissively, as if tossing a bone to someone unworthy. Marcus answered with silence, but that silence was already the signature on their death warrant. He stepped off the plane, and the moment he entered the glass jet bridge leading into the terminal, the energy shifted completely. No more disdain. No more eyes measuring a person's worth by the brand of his clothes. Standing in the center of the walkway was Sarah Jenkins, in her steel-gray blazer hair, pulled tight-faced stern and eyes loaded with compressed worry. Beside her were two Hail Tech attorneys, still clutching their open folders, and one step in front of them stood David Tran, North Star's Seattle Regional Executive, his face pale like a man staring at his own execution. Mr. Hale wee David tried to extend a hand, but Marcus walked past him, as if he were nothing more than a shadow. Without slowing, he spoke 4 words that sent shockwaves through the entire North Star team. "Bring them here." Sarah did not need clarification. A single look from her sent the attorneys moving, intercepting Brenda and Captain Robert Thorne, just as they were preparing to leave with the flow of passengers. Brenda glanced around in confusion, her wide eyes panicked, as if she could not understand why she was being called back. Captain Thorne scowled irritation, tightening his jaw. When the group finally formed a circle before Marcus, the air around them fell silent. Passing travelers stopped to watch. Several North Star employees drifted closer, sensing something monumental. But the most terrified of all were Brenda and Thorne, oblivious to who stood before them, and unaware of what they had already lost. Marcus turned, standing tall, his dark eyes sweeping across each face. No sound, no wasted breath. Then he spoke, his voice low and sharp, like hot steel plunged into ice. "I will say this once." Brenda swallowed hard. Thorne froze like a carved statue. "You have just destroyed North Star's future." Thorne's brow furrowed his tone, snapping with annoyance. "What the hell are you talking about?" "We followed protocol." "No," Marcus replied, each word nailing the truth into place. "You followed your own prejudice." A silence heavy enough to crush the terminal settled over them. David stepped forward, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Hale, I sincerely apologize for this incident. If you would just," Marcus cut him off with a flick of his hand. "You do not have the authority to speak here." The entire terminal seemed to tremble. Brenda's jaw dropped. "Who are you?" Why, Sarah answered for him, her voice cold and precise. "He is Marcus Hale, CEO of Hale Tech Logistics, the man North Star has been begging to partner with." Brenda's face drained of color instantly. Her lips trembled. Captain Thorne stepped back half a pace, like the ground had shifted beneath him. Marcus moved one step closer, his eyes cutting through them. "I was prepared to choose North Star, a contract worth $50 million per year, a lifeline for your airline." He paused, letting the weight sink into each of them. "But today, in 10 minutes on that plane, you made me cancel everything." Brenda covered her mouth. No, you're joking. We didn't even do anything. You did nothing." Marcus laughed softly, a sound so cold Brenda staggered backward. "You looked at me and saw what a man in a hoodie, unworthy of seat 1A. You looked at Linda and saw what a VIP you must protect at all costs. You ignored facts. You ignored the ticket. You ignored fairness. You chose privilege." Thorne tried to defend himself. "I was maintaining order. He was not comply. Call me he one more time." Marcus did not raise his voice. Yet the force of it made 3 employees nearby flinch. Thorne stopped mid-sentence, his face bleaching to white. Marcus lowered his tone, but it lost none of its icy edge. "You threatened to remove me from the flight just to satisfy a privileged passenger. That is not maintaining order. That is discrimination." Marcus stared directly into Thorne's eyes. "And you personally dragged this airline into the grave." David tried again, his voice shaking. "Mr. Hale, please allow us to address this internally. We can discipline restructure anything too late," Marcus said. "The termination notice was sent to CEO Ellison 15 minutes ago. A North Star employee behind them gasped. The group fell silent as death. Sarah stepped forward, handing David the printed letter. "In case you need proof." David read the first 3 lines and broke down in tears. Brenda covered her mouth with both hands, eyes red and glossy, her body trembling as if her knees might give out. Captain Thorne stood, frozen, hollow-eyed, as if the blood had been drained from him. Marcus looked at them and delivered the final blow, like the closing of a steel door. "I do not need to fire you." He paused, letting the airport breathe in one collective gasp. "I just fired your company's future." No one spoke another word. No one even exhaled loudly. Brenda sank onto a nearby bench. Thorne turned away, covering his face. David clutched his forehead, as if tearing at his own hair. Marcus walked away, each step echoing like gunshots through North Star's collapsing empire. And as he passed through Gate E7 and the automatic doors slid shut behind him, soft and silent, the only sound left in the minds of everyone standing there was the sound of something breaking apart. An airline that had soared for decades had in mere minutes been dragged straight into the ground, all because they misjudged a man in a hoodie who stepped into first class. And from this moment on, that mistake would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Marcus Hale's final message before leaving Seattle Airport contained only 4 words. "Begin the process now." And only minutes later, the dominoes began to fall. No one at North Star understood the terrifying speed of a global-level CEO in motion until the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, and every management system across their partnered corporations lit up with priority alerts. More than 20 urgent emails went out. Internal call lines turned red across entire dashboards, and in North Star's Chicago headquarters, CEO Mark Ellison's conference room dissolved into chaos. Mark had not even finished his sip of coffee when the termination letter from Hale Tech appeared on the center of the large digital display with 4 bold words stamped across the top termination, effective immediately. He read it once, then again, and still could not believe it. $50 million per year, the cornerstone contract of their 5-year expansion plan, the deal he had proudly promised the board as virtually guaranteed. And now it was gone. In seconds, an emergency meeting was called. Senior executives rushed in, faces ashen, as if smelling jet fuel, leaking before takeoff. "What is this?" Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the coffee cup. No one answered. The room reeked of fear. A department head finally spoke through a shaking breath. The VIP passenger. On Flight 417. It was Marcus Hale. What Mark shot up from his chair. Which Marcus Hale? Another executive replied immediately. Marcus Hale of Hale Tech Logistics. The CEO. The man sitting in seat 1A. Silence swept across the room like a funeral shroud. Mark felt his chest tighten. They had thrown out the wrong man. A man every airline in the world would roll out a red carpet for. And the terrifying part was not his name. It was his title. CEO of their biggest partner. CEO of a contract crucial for survival. CEO of a decade of projected revenue. And they had treated him like a cheap passenger. Mark clutched the sides of his head, pacing like someone standing in the ashes of his own making. "Call David Tran," he ordered. "Call everyone. Call the crew. I need to know what happened." But moments later, David's update sent Mark collapsing into his chair. So David said, sounding like a man who had walked through fire, he told us directly that discriminatory behavior by the crew cost us the contract. It is written clearly in the termination letter. "Discrimination," Mark stammered. "We are in trouble for that again." And like lightning striking a mast, Mark understood that this crisis couldn't be contained. If it leaked, North Star would become the center of a media firestorm. But leaking was not just possible. It had already happened. On the other side of the country, a tech blogger who had been on Flight 417, quietly filming Captain Thorne threatening Marcus, uploaded a 32-second clip titled "How North Star Just Shot Itself in the Foot." It went viral at the speed of light. Within 2 hours, the hashtag NorthStarFail hit #1. Furious comments exploded. It is 2025, and this is still how they treat black passengers. HaleTech's CEO kicked out of the seat he bought. North Star is finished. Any airline that insults Marcus Hale clearly wants to retire early. By then, North Star had lost control of everything. Media swarmed. Major outlets called non-stop. Shareholders erupted in rage. Then the most terrifying force arrived: the numbers. Stock price dropped 12% in 2 hours. Another 3% after the blogger posted a detailed analysis. Market value plunged more than $500 million in a single afternoon. Not speculation, not rumor, reality. Meanwhile, at the Seattle terminal exit, Brenda Collins sat collapsed on a bench, eyes swollen, heart pounding like a drum. She snatched up her phone and saw her name everywhere under the viral clip. Thousands of comments calling her a racist flight attendant, the woman who destroyed $50 million, the face of entitlement. Brenda broke down. What happened on that flight lasted only minutes, but it was devouring the 11-year career she had built. Captain Thorne stood beside her, pale palms sweaty. He had once been proud of his reputation of safe flights of 30 years of service. But no one mentioned any of that now. They mentioned only one thing, that he had threatened to remove the CEO of HaleTech from the plane. From a distance, Sarah Jenkins watched them collapse, but she felt no satisfaction. Only one truth echoed in her mind: every action has a cost. Marcus stepped into his car as the Hailtech team stood in solemn silence. He did not look back at Brenda or Thorne, not because he hated them, but because he understood that no one could withstand the gaze of the man they had misjudged. Instead, he turned to Sarah and said, "Prepare the meeting with Apex. They will have the contract before sunset." Sarah nodded, and North Star Marcus exhaled softly, his eyes lifting toward Seattle's grey sky. They chose their path, and the sky is about to close on them. At North Star headquarters, the board voted to remove CEO Mark Ellison that same night. The news broke instantly. No debate, no excuses. Leadership must be accountable, and the negligence of the team under him had dragged the airline into disaster. But the worst blow was still ahead. Kohler and Stein, the investment group holding 18% of North Star's shares, issued a statement considering divestment due to uncontrollable brand risk. It was the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. The entire North Star system trembled, near overnight collapse. And all because of one reckless moment in first class. One moment they believed no one important was watching. But they were wrong. That man was Marcus Hale, a man who never lets injustice pass, a man who understands that one small action can trigger an explosion powerful enough to erase an airline from the sky. A man North Star misjudged and paid for with their entire future. And the storm Marcus unleashed was far from over. It had only just begun. As night settled over Seattle, and the city moved with its usual steady rhythm, every passing minute felt like a blade pressed against a North Star's throat, cutting deeper with no chance to scream. And elsewhere, on the 32nd floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where Marcus Hale sat by the window, watching the long ribbons of streetlights pulse like the city's veins, a call from the legal department poured more fuel onto the fire, swallowing North Star whole. Marcus Daniel Reed said, over the speaker, his calm voice carrying the weight of a bell tolling before an execution. Bad news for North Star just came in. The blogger confirmed the man being threatened was the CEO of Hailtech. The video is spreading at 4 times the usual rate. Marcus leaned back, his eyes no longer angry, but filled with something colder, a quiet, distant regret. They brought this on themselves. He answered softly, his tone light as breath, yet heavy enough to slam every last door shut. Meanwhile, at North Star headquarters in Chicago, entire departments collapsed into chaos like a hive smashed open. PR managers sprinted between rooms, sweat running down their backs. Market analysts updated plummeting charts so quickly, the red line looked like it was falling straight into the basement. Mark Ellison, recently stripped of authority, sat slumped in a leather chair with his head in his hands, his spine trembling with each breath. He had never faced a catastrophe of this magnitude. Not once in his decades in the industry had he seen a contract destroyed by the very people whose job was to protect it. The bitter truth was too sharp to swallow. Everything began with a single contemptuous remark and a ridiculous demand from a passenger, and it spread like a disease, tearing down layer after layer of their system. In the crew lounge, Brenda Collins sat curled up like a fallen leaf in a storm. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but she did not dare look terrified to see her name dragged onto the public altar. She remembered every moment on that flight, how she walked past Marcus without bothering to check his boarding pass. How she smiled at Linda Crawford while looking at Marcus as though he were an obstacle. She remembered Captain Thorne saying, "If you do not cooperate, we will call security." and she remembered Marcus, standing up saying nothing, but with eyes she had once mistaken for weakness. Now those eyes returned to her in nightmares with no end. Captain Thorne stood alone, in a corner, one hand against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor. He was 58, and the career he spent a lifetime building had been shattered in one afternoon. When he thought back to the moment he threatened to strip Marcus of his seat, he finally understood what he had not seen. Then he had never believed Marcus had any right. He had seen only a black man in ordinary clothes, and in that single moment he believed his own authority outweighed the man's dignity. But the truth now was a mirror he could not escape. He had been wrong, terribly, irreversibly wrong. At home, Linda Crawford drifted into her luxurious kitchen like a ghost. She had no idea the news was spreading until her husband, Richard, hurled the iPad onto the table. "What did you do on that plane?" he demanded, his voice tight enough to explode. Linda looked at the screen. The 32-second video played every snap of her fingers, every pointing gesture, every dismissive word captured. And when she saw the millions of furious comments attacking her, she felt something she had never known in her entire privileged life: fear. You are misunderstanding," she stammered. "He was in my seat. I was just—" "That was COO, Marcus Hale," Richard shouted. "My company's biggest client. You just destroyed 60% of our revenue. Linda's world spun. No, that cannot be." "It can," Richard said coldly, "and it already has. You destroyed this family's future in minutes." Those words cut deeper than anything social media had thrown at her. She collapsed into a chair. Her life, built on arrogance, superiority, and privilege, had just fallen off a cliff. In Seattle, Marcus left the hotel with Sarah and Daniel for the crucial meeting at Apex Air. When he stepped inside, the entire leadership team of Apex stood to greet him, not because he was Marcus Hale, the CEO, but because they knew they were welcoming a man who had just proven he was willing to defend his principles, no matter who offended him. That was real power. The meeting lasted only 18 minutes, so short no one believed it. A $50 million per year contract was signed on the spot without altering a single clause from Haletech's proposal 2 weeks earlier. Apex CEO Maria Flores looked at Marcus and said, "I know you are not here because North Star was wrong. You are here because you believe the right people deserve a chance." Marcus nodded. "When a system rots, the ones who suffer most are customers and employees. I choose to prevent that." After the meeting, Sarah asked him, "You do not feel sorry for them. North Star used to be the strongest candidate." Marcus gazed toward the horizon through the glass, the reflection of city lights turning his eyes almost metallic. "I do feel sorry," he said, "but only for the people harmed by that system, not for the ones who created it." That night, North Star announced it was suspending 10 routes for internal review, but everyone knew the truth. They could no longer afford to operate without that massive contract. The next morning, the stock price continued to fall, dropping to its lowest point in 14 years. 2 of the 3 major investment funds pulled out. A news outlet called "The Scandal," the fastest corporate collapse in modern aviation history. But the most terrifying truth remained: this everything was only beginning. And everyone involved, from the CEO to the flight attendant, to the captain, to the entitled passenger, were merely fragments of a much larger picture. A picture called consequences. Marcus Hale was not the one who created the storm. He was simply the first man to stand upright in the middle of it. And now that the sky itself was shaking, those who once said, "You do not belong here," were finally beginning to understand that they were the ones who had no place in the future. At dawn the next morning, before sunlight touched the glass towers of Seattle, another shock wave rippled across corporate America, like a crack slicing through tempered glass, sharp, deep, and impossible to repair. If the previous night North Star writhed under the crushing weight of media and market pressure, then this morning the price of a single moment of arrogance came knocking somewhere else, the 900-square-meter Crawford estate on the outskirts of Portland. Linda Crawford, the woman who once walked with her chin so high it seemed the world existed to serve her, now sat collapsed on the kitchen floor. She had never imagined a day like this. Her phone had become a weapon, slaughtering whatever remained of her confidence, because every time the screen lit up, another vicious comment arrived. Her name, her face, her voice, all being mocked, judged, and shared at the speed of light. But what made her hands tremble was not social media. It was the heavy footsteps of her furious husband, Richard Crawford, storming down the stairs. He was not the type to explode easily. He had always been gentle and rational. But this morning, holding an email from Hailtech Logistics announcing the termination of their contract with his family company, Crawford Freight Components, citing conduct unbecoming, offensive, and inconsistent with ethical values from a key member of the owner's family, Richard felt as if someone had torn apart 22 years of his life's work. "Do you know what you have done?" Richard lowered the letter to the table. His voice no longer belonged to a family man. It was the voice of someone stabbed through the heart. Linda gasped for breath. I did not know who he was. I only. He is CEO Marcus Hale, Richard roared, the sound ricocheting off the marble walls. The client that brings in more than 60% of our revenue, the lifeline of this company. You insulted the one person you should never have touched. Linda shook her head, vision blurring. You have to explain. Tell them I did not mean it. You just destroyed my company. Richard slammed his hand on the table, so hard a coffee cup flew off. Linda fell silent. They cannot end everything over something so small. It was not small, Richard cut her off. You treated him like trash. And now I am paying for your arrogance. And in that moment, Linda felt something she had never experienced, the realization that her privilege no longer protected her. And the man she once believed was her shield now looked at her as the cause of the greatest collapse of his life. Meanwhile, at Hailtech's Los Angeles office, Marcus received a supply chain report. Crawford Freight Components is a Tier 3 supplier on the Synapse project. They rely on Hailtech for 80% of their revenue. Termination means bankruptcy within 2 quarters. Sarah placed the report on Marcus's desk. Do you want to reconsider? After all, they are a supplier, not North Star. Marcus looked at the report, at the numbers, at the reasons listed for termination. His calm remained, but beneath it lay a painful weight carried by someone who had suffered similar injustices in his own past. They chose their behavior, Marcus said. We are simply choosing our response. Sarah nodded without further question. The decision was signed. The consequences began. In Portland, the argument between Linda and Richard grew so loud, neighbors could hear the shouting from their multi-million-dollar estate. Tell me, did Hailtech say they will give us a chance to fix this? Linda pleaded. Richard turned away, unable to meet her eyes. No. They ended it immediately. No negotiation. No second chance. Linda collapsed, burying her face in her hands. But what hurt her most was not losing money. It was losing everything she built on status. The admiration of wealthy social circles, her chair position, at charity boards, the false respect of her peers. All gone because of 32 seconds captured on a plane. Someone once said that karma never arrives late. It arrives exactly when you believe you are untouchable. Meanwhile, news of Crawford Freight Components losing the Hailtech contract spread through the market almost as quickly as news of North Star's collapse. A finance article carried the headline, "A Family Destroyed by 32 Seconds." The article concluded, "In the world of CEOs. How you treat people when you think they hold no power is what determines your true fate." At Apex Airlines headquarters, where the new contract had just been signed, Maria Flores watched the news of North Star's implosion. She turned to Marcus and said, "You didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves when they forgot how to treat human beings." Marcus stayed silent. But inside him, a childhood memory stirred the image of a little black boy pushed out of a store because he did not wear shoes as nice as the other children. Back then he had no power to speak. But now that little boy had grown up, and the power he carried was something no one could take away. That afternoon, North Star held an emergency press conference, but the mistakes only piled up. They called the incident a service error. The media erupted instantly. Service error, threatening a first-class passenger, is a service error. Discrimination is a service error. A major outlet published a headline, "North Star digs its own grave by denying instead of admitting responsibility." By evening, stock prices fell another 8%. The spokesperson was condemned. The interim CEO was attacked. Analysts predicted the airline would lose at least 40% of its business travel customers in the coming year. In his hotel suite, after 12 hours of successful negotiations with Apex, Marcus stood alone by the tall window, watching the rain streak down the glass. He did not feel joy. He did not feel victory. He did not feel superiority. Only one question lingered in his mind. How does an airline forget how to treat people with basic equality? Sarah stepped in behind him. "Marcus," she said gently, "you know you did what so many people never get a chance to do. You showed them the consequences." "I do not want revenge," Marcus replied. "I just want them to understand that the worth of a person is not measured by clothes or skin." Sarah smiled softly. "And you just taught them that lesson with $50 million. Rain traced long lines down the glass." Marcus looked at his reflection, a man who didn't need to strike back with words, because he let truth speak for him. But he didn't know that across the city, a letter was being written. A letter from the newly appointed highest authority at North Star. A letter that would begin the next chapter of an unexpected rebirth. A chapter in which Marcus, though he did not require it, would play a decisive role. And karma still had one final circle to close. That morning, as Marcus Hale sat in the conference room on the 27th floor of Hale Tech headquarters, reviewing the system integration plan with Apex Airlines, a thick white envelope with no logo and no seal was placed on the table before him by his assistant. "From North Star," she said softly, her hesitant voice, sounding as though speaking any louder might make the room explode. Marcus looked at the envelope with an unreadable expression, a calmness mixed with caution, because after everything that had happened, he no longer expected any apology from them. He opened it slowly, pulled out a crisp sheet of paper with sharp handwriting, devoid of pride, and the opening line made him pause. "Mr. Hale, I am not writing to ask for the contract. I am writing to ask for a chance to make things right." The letter came from North Star's newly appointed CEO, Isabella Rossi, who had taken over only 3 days after Mark Ellison was removed in a blaze of shareholder outrage. She did not defend herself. She did not beg for forgiveness. She did not shift the blame. She cut straight into the truth like a blade across taut steel, admitting that North Star was rotten from its foundations, that arrogance and discrimination had become part of its operating culture, that the decay in how they valued human beings had spread so deeply that even she, back when she was COO of a competing airline, had seen their downfall coming long before it happened. "You have given us the most expensive lesson," she wrote. "But a lesson has value only when the student genuinely wants to change. I want you to help us do what we haven't had the courage to begin." Marcus sat silently for several minutes, the letter resting on the table like a cut inside the quiet. Sarah walked in, caught the look on his face, and asked, "What happened?" Marcus handed her the letter. Sarah read quickly, but each sentence made her eyes narrow further. "She wants you to help them rebuild their entire corporate culture?" she asked, half in disbelief, half in suspicion. "Yes," Marcus replied, "not because they want to save North Star, but because they finally realize they failed at building a system that respects human beings." Sarah folded her arms. "Marcus, you owe them nothing. They treated you like garbage. They cost their own company the biggest contract of the decade." "Why should you help them?" Marcus stayed quiet for a long moment. He looked out the window where towering buildings stood like silent witnesses to the war between belief and collapse. "Not for them," he said, "but for the people who will board their planes tomorrow, next month, next year, the people who were like me 20 years ago with no power to fight against prejudice." Sarah sighed, no longer arguing, because she understood the difference in Marcus. His power was not what set him apart. It was the reason he used it. 3 days later, the meeting took place in an unexpected location, the quiet penthouse level of the Riverside Hotel, not the cold corporate halls of North Star. Isabella Rossi entered with 3 key members of her new leadership team, the head of human resources, the chief operations officer, and the head of customer service. There were no cameras, no PR team, no press. Only the silence of a company standing at the boundary between death and rebirth and the man who had forced them to see their true reflection. Isabella did not waste time. "Mr. Hale," she said, standing straight to her, voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "North Star is not asking you to return. We would not dare. We are asking you to tell us the truth we ignored." Marcus looked at each of them in turn. He saw no excuses, no attempts to deflect responsibility. Only the honest shame of people realizing they had allowed the wrong things to happen under their watch for far too long. "You did not lose the contract because of a mistake," Marcus said, his low, steady voice striking with the weight of a hammer on anvil. "You lost it because you allowed contempt to become a procedure, because you let favoritism become a VIP standard, because you let the power of wealthy passengers outweigh the value of human dignity." He looked directly at Isabella. "And worse, you trained your employees to believe that mistreating customers is acceptable as long as those customers do not hold a first-class ticket." The head of customer service bowed her head. "You are right," she whispered. "We allowed people like Brenda to become the norm." "No," Marcus corrected. "Brenda acted according to the culture you created." The air in the room grew heavier. Isabella took a deep breath. "Then how do we break it?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "A toxic culture cannot be fixed with apologies. It can only be replaced by a new system." He walked to the digital board and wrote 4 words: Dignity First Protocol. Every procedure will revolve around 4 principles. Marcus said, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. 1. Respect, first service second. 2. No passenger is allowed to override the rights of another passenger. 3. Any discriminatory behavior from staff or customers is addressed immediately. 4 employee decisions are based on truth, not on the status of the passenger. Silence filled the room. Finally, Isabella spoke. Do you really believe we can do this? For the first time, Marcus's gaze softened. I believe that if you do not, you will not survive. Christina, the head of human resources, asked quietly, If we truly change, would you support us as a consultant, not for profit, but to help us make it right? A long silence followed. Marcus remembered every moment in his life when he had been judged by what he wore, by what he lacked, by what he was not. He remembered the man who once pushed him out of a store because he assumed Marcus could not afford anything inside. He remembered 12-year-old Marcus Hale standing in a parking lot, asking his mother, Why do they look at me like that? And finally he said, Wes, but I will tell the truth, and you must be able to handle it. Isabella's tears fell, not from weakness, but from the weight of hope after days drowning in despair. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. They did not discuss profits. They did not discuss brand image. They did not discuss PR. They discussed people, the one thing North Star had forgotten for years. And when the meeting ended, Isabella rose and bowed deeply before Marcus. You took away what we did not deserve. Now you are giving us the chance to rebuild what we lost, Marcus replied. I am not rebuilding North Star. I am rebuilding for the people who will walk onto your planes. That day when Marcus stepped out of the meeting room, the Seattle sky looked bluer than usual. But below that calm sky, an airline was beginning the hardest journey in its history, a journey from arrogance to humility, from collapse to rebirth. And all because one man once sat in seat 1A, then was pushed to seat 2A, all because of a single moment, a moment that changed their destiny. And karma still had one final circle waiting to close, not through apologies, but through action. 18 months after that historic meeting, something no one in the aviation industry ever believed possible had become reality. North Star rose from its own ashes. And it did not rise through empty slogans or glamorous campaigns, but through real change, the kind of change born the day Marcus Hale stood in a quiet meeting room at the Riverside Hotel and exposed the rot at the core of their culture. Under the leadership of Isabella Rossi, the Dignity First Protocol became the new foundation of the entire organization. Flight attendants were placed into VR training programs that simulated the experiences of vulnerable passengers, putting them into situations where they were ignored, belittled, or judged by appearance, scenarios they had never imagined before. Veteran attendants who once took pride in their subtle power stood speechless as they were forced to feel what they had once inflicted on others. North Star made a shocking decision, permanently banning 14 VIP passengers with a history of abusive or demeaning behavior, including individuals who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with the airline every year. The decision made the business community buzz with disbelief, but it also brought thousands of employees to tears because for the first time they felt their company was standing with them. Change started with the flight crews, spread to the airport managers, and reached all the way down to the baggage teams. In 18 months, North Star not only rewrote its procedures, but rebuilt the trust it had shattered from the inside out and from employees to customers. An independent report from the North American Aviation Association called this transformation the most extraordinary cultural rebirth in industry history. But karma was not finished. It returned to those who helped ignite North Star's collapse, the Crawford family. After the termination of the Hailtech contract, Crawford Freight Components collapsed within 8 months, losing more than 60% of its revenue, as other partners pulled out over ethical concerns. Richard Crawford was forced to sell the company for less than 1/3 of its initial value just to pay off debts. And Linda, the woman who once said, "Do you know who my husband is on the flight?" now worked as a receptionist in a small dental clinic, wearing a cheap cream-colored polyester uniform, requesting sick days because of emotional stress. Her golf club membership was revoked. The charity society removed her from their list. The business community dismissed her. And worst of all people, no longer looked at her as someone with status. One afternoon, while she was arranging magazines in the patient waiting room, she saw a neatly placed issue of Forbes. The face on the cover was unmistakable. Strong eyes, calm smile, the expression of someone who had walked through a storm. The bold headline read, "Marcus Hale, the architect reshaping the future of global transport." Linda froze. Her heart dropped straight into her stomach. Not from envy, but from a level of regret so heavy it almost crushed her. She set the magazine down slowly, though her hands trembled as if it weighed a ton. In that moment, she finally understood the lesson she had ignored all her life, the thing she had undervalued most. The dignity of another human being was powerful enough to destroy the life of someone consumed by arrogance. Meanwhile, across the country, Marcus Hale stepped aboard a new North Star aircraft, the jet bearing the redesigned blue sky emblem that reflected the company's renewed culture. He had not asked for special treatment and did not need any. But when the lead flight attendant, a young woman with proud eyes, approached him, she quietly said, "Mr. Hale, the entire crew wants to thank you. Because of you, we get to work in a place that is safer and fairer." Marcus looked at her, his eyes softening. I only hope he said that someone in seat 1A and someone in seat 34C are treated with the same respect. As the plane lifted into the air, the clear blue sky unfolded before him, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt the sky truly open, not because he changed an airline, but because he helped them change themselves. And after all the storms, the long, spinning circle of karma finally closed. As the North Star jet glided through a thick layer of clouds, the afternoon sunlight angled through the window, casting a long ribbon of light across the table in front of Marcus Hale. He sat in seat 1A, the very seat that more than a year earlier had ignited the crisis that brought North Star to its knees. The only difference now was that this time the air was not filled with contempt, but with a quiet and profound respect reflected in every small intentional action of the flight crew. A young flight attendant set a warm lemon drink gently on the table, bowing her head with genuine sincerity. "If you need anything today, please tell us," she said softly. "Not because of who you are, but because this is how we are taught to treat every passenger." Marcus nodded, his heart tightening slightly at the memory of being pushed out of seat 1A simply because of a hoodie and the color of his skin. But then he looked around the cabin where every attendant carried themselves with confidence, awareness, and responsibility for the decisions they made. It was the unmistakable sign of a new culture, one he had helped them build, not through contracts or money, but through an uncompromising refusal to let injustice pass. On the ground, North Star had returned to the race stronger than ever, thanks to reforms rebuilt from the core. Employees who once trembled before VIP passengers now had the authority to refuse abusive behavior. Customers who once believed they were above others were forced to learn that privileges didn't come packaged with power. North Star had gone from a laughing stock to a case study taught in MBA programs under the title "When Culture Destroys a Company and When Truth Saves It." Meanwhile, Marcus, the man once dismissed because of a hoodie, had become a symbol of dignity in business. Voices of Integrity, the renowned organization honoring leaders who create social change, invited him as the keynote speaker for their global summit. They wrote, "You did not just save an airline from its own arrogance. You proved that true leadership does not come from position, but from principle." But for Marcus, none of that mattered more than one thing. He had done for others what 12-year-old Marcus once wished someone had done for him. He spoke up. Marcus gazed out the window, where the sky stretched like an endless blue silk horizon. No limits, no walls, no doors slamming in his face. Only an open horizon, a reminder that a person's true strength does not come from anger, but from turning wounds into lessons for the world. And below that sky, in the small town where Linda Crawford now worked at a dental clinic, she read the news of North Star being honored for its cultural transformation. She quietly set her phone down and stared at her hands, the same hands she once waved impatiently to demand seat 1A, and understood that her life had spiraled into darkness, not because of Marcus, but because of herself. Marcus's life, by contrast, had risen into the light, not because he demanded fairness, but because he created it. At the end of the flight, when the lead attendant approached to thank him, once again, Marcus stood, smiled, and said, "I did not do this for you. I did it for the person who will sit here after me. Never forget that." The attendant nodded, her eyes shimmering. "We will not forget, and we will teach others not to forget." As Marcus descended the aircraft stairs, a breeze carrying the scent of the ocean swept over him, gentle and wide as a blessing. He knew he had completed the circle of truth, dignity, and justice. And that story, from a small confrontation in a cabin to an industry-wide transformation, was no longer about a CEO being mistreated. It was the story of a man who stood firm against prejudice, a man who dared to say enough, a man who forced an entire system to change in order to protect those with no voice. Marcus Hale left the airport that day with steps light, as though he had repaid a long overdue debt to himself, leaving behind not destruction, but rebirth. And in the sky above, where North Star jets soared with newfound pride, each one carried his legacy, that one person, just one, is enough to make the whole world correct its course. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and power dynamics, the story of Marcus Hale reveals a sharp truth. Real strength does not lie in an expensive suit or the status printed on an airline ticket. It lies in how a system treats people in the very moment it assumes that no one matters. A culture that drifts by even 1 degree can drag an entire company into crisis. Yet, a single individual who stands up and says, "Enough," can pull it back onto the right path. Marcus did not seek revenge, he reset the standard. And that is the essence of leadership, turning pain into progress, turning a small act of injustice into a warning for an entire industry. If you believe that dignity must lead every conversation hit, like to spread this value and subscribe to follow the next journeys of justice, comment with the phrase, "honor dignity," to remind one another that respect is a value that can never be negotiated.